Hello and welcome to Gaming 101. I'm sorry about being relegated to our office until we have a few more sign-ups. I'm not really able to convince the dean to give us a full classroom, so we'll just have to deal with this slightly more intimate vibe for a little while until I can convince the dean to let me take a full lecture hall. But until then, today's class is going to be pretty chill. Just going over the syllabus and stuff we'll be covering in this course. So let's get started. Alright, so my idea for this is to kind of attempt to take you, presumably a non-gamer, probably the partner of a gamer, through the ins and outs of how to play a video game. Now, it's important for me to say, there's no right or wrong way to enjoy a game. However, video games have developed extremely quickly over the years. And if video game history interests you, let me know, and I'll see if I can convince the dean to let me teach a game design history class. But for now, I would recommend checking out this channel. They have a ton of really great videos about that specifically. For now, though, it's important to know that while you can't enjoy a game wrong, there are certain conventions that have developed as game development matured. And for those of you who are just now getting into gaming, it can be pretty difficult to catch up to everybody else who's been playing since they were kids. After all, we adults don't have hours to spend banging our heads against a boss to figure out how to beat it. My intention here is to kind of fast-track you through that process, to teach you how to read different signifiers in games, which are basically just subtle subtextual things that a game does to teach you how you're supposed to do certain things in that game. And by being familiar with these signifiers, ideally you won't wind up getting stuck and frustrated, because enjoying frustration is very much an advanced skill we won't get into until at least your third year. Today's class will be rather simple, not too complicated, and don't worry, I hate icebreakers just as much as you do, so we won't do any of that either. The first thing we're going to do is cover game genres. These are an extremely important part of gaming, though they aren't directly linked to the actual gameplay skills, but instead these help you find games you're interested in playing. And that's why we're going to start with it, so that hopefully you'll have somewhere to jump in, and you'll be a little bit more informed about how to actually jump in and stuff that you might find interesting. You can think of these similarly to genres in film, although in addition to describing things like theme and general subject matter, these will help you know what kind of gameplay to expect from a given title. And generally speaking, if you like a particular genre in movies or books, you'll probably enjoy that genre in games too. You can think of game genres as being the exact same as a movie or book genre, but interactive instead of passive. So if there's a movie franchise you enjoy, or a book series, that wouldn't be a bad place to start. Don't be afraid to branch out though. After all, variety is the spice of life, and that is very much true with gaming. There are also game-specific genres, like puzzle or first-person shooters, which don't really have a direct corollary in other, more passive media. So again, don't be afraid to branch out. And if you have a friend or partner who's a self-proclaimed gamer, that is a perfect place to start, as they'll probably have a rather extensive backlog they would be happy to take you through. And I've never known a gamer who didn't jump at the opportunity to explore the wonderful world of gaming with someone close to them. Now, the best way, as with any media, to understand what genre you enjoy is to play a wide variety and find which ones vibe with you and which ones don't. However, that can be an extremely time-consuming task because many games attempt to be as long as possible, as opposed to movies, which are only about 3 hours at most. It's pretty similar to books, actually, where a lot of books will be very long, and at least for me, it's pretty daunting to even think about starting to read one. But there are a few ways around this particular pitfall. For one, find some streamers you like and check out the games they're playing. See if anything about it seems interesting to you, and if you find a game that piques your interest, go check it out on Steam, Epic Games, or whichever marketplace is included in the console that you're playing on. And as a side note, if you're on a console and $60 to $70 is a bit steep just to try and see if you like a particular game, you can always buy used, or take advantage of the fairly generous return policies of pretty much any digital game marketplace. Though keep in mind that Nintendo does not do returns, so I would stick to used physical games for that console specifically. However, back to genres. Keep in mind that the same pitfalls apply here as do with any genreified media. Just because a game is listed as a particular genre doesn't mean that it fits neatly into a little box. Just because a game might be outside your usual preferences doesn't mean you won't like it. An example from my own life is Cocoon, an absolutely gorgeous indie puzzle game. I'm generally not into puzzle games because I find them either far too difficult or just boring. But for whatever reason, I couldn't stop playing this game. I just kept wanting to come back and play the next part of the puzzle. Now it helps that this is only about a 4-hour game in all. But still, it's worth branching out from what you know you like and trying something new, because you never know what might resonate with you. Now that we know a bit about why we care about genres in gaming, and how to go about finding which one is right for you, let's go over some of the larger genres you'll find. There are an infinite amount of potential genres out there, and if you really want to get pedantic about it, you could put basically anything into any genre. But for the purposes of this class, and for your sanity, we'll stick to the more major and widely accepted genres. Also, something to note here is that within the gaming world, we have a bit of a shorthand for describing games we don't really think fit into any particular classical genre. And that is to just tack on like to the end of whatever game we think it's similar to. If this particular game style persists for long enough, it can also become solidified as a genre itself. The two more common ones you'll hear be referred to are Souls-like and roguelike. The former stemming from the Dark Souls franchise, and the latter referring to a game by the name of, you guessed it, Rogue. We can explore what to expect from these genres in a later class, because there's a bit of nuance to these kind of community-created genres, and we're going to try and keep it simple for today. So now on to the genres that I think might be kind of helpful for you to get a grasp on what you might find interesting and what might appeal to you when you're just starting out in gaming. The first, and probably the most mainstream, is first-person shooters. These are really any game you play from a first-person perspective. That is, looking out from the character's eyes as if you are them. And this is probably what most non-gamers think of when they think of the titular game. Now, you don't technically need to do any shooting to be a first-person shooter, though that is a pretty consistent through line. Popular games of this genre include Call of Duty, Battlefield, Doom, Halo, Far Cry, Destiny, and many, many, many more. Now, a lot of times, first-person shooters, or FPS games, are, or at least include some kind of competitive aspect, and generally are pretty light on story, with their main focus being on the mechanics and making every action feel great to execute. They are usually pretty skill-based, though they're also pretty easy to jump into without knowing anything about how to play. So games like Halo can be great for teaching basic FPS mechanics to new players. Though more modern FPS games, I find, tend to presume more than other genres do about what the player knows in terms of mechanics. So basic elements like how to shoot, good strategies, and the basic mechanics of how the game modes work can sometimes be rather sparse. If these interest you, I would highly recommend checking out the Halo Master Chief Collection and playing the original Halo, because they do a pretty good job teaching you how things like the controls work and some basic strategies which can help you be more effective in the fight. And Halo is one of the franchises that a lot of really die-hard first-person shooter fans really cut their teeth on when they were just learning how to play games at all. The next genre is action/action-adventure. These include more plot-focused games. Think movies like Indiana Jones or The Fast and the Furious. Most of the time, these aren't going for deep philosophical ponderings on the nature of life, preferring instead to give you an action-packed and blood-pumping adventure. Popular titles from this genre will be things like Tomb Raider, Uncharted, The Legend of Zelda, God of War, and The Last of Us. These will be great if you want a bit more story, but still enjoy the more adrenaline-packed aspects of something like a first-person shooter. These will also generally be from the third-person perspective, which means that instead of being in the character's head, the camera is kind of floating behind the character. This generally gives a more cinematic feel and lets you, the player, see what you're doing a bit better. Games from this genre often mix multiple mechanics from other genres, such as puzzles, and having a camera that is disconnected from the character helps you get your bearings a little bit better than if you were in first person. I think a great starter game from this genre is any of the Legend of Zelda games, though Breath of the Wild is probably the best of that subset. There are a lot of mechanics and tutorials which are geared towards a player who doesn't exactly know what they're doing intuitively yet. And Nintendo does a good job not assuming too much about what signifiers the player might already know going into the game. So I think, generally speaking, Nintendo games as a whole are a pretty good starting point for any genre, because being geared more towards younger players, they try to teach you a lot more than many PC games would do. Our next genre is going to be puzzle games. As the name implies, these are any game where your main objective is to solve a puzzle. You'll usually be tasked with trying to figure out how to get a ball from one point to another while avoiding obstacles, or maybe try to figure out how to open a door by pressing a button which is obscured by something. These skills often build on each other as the game progresses to allow you to solve more and more difficult puzzles. This genre is really where video games shine, in my opinion. Because of their digital nature, you can do pretty much anything in a video game, so you don't need to rely on the classic puzzle designs that are limited by our physical world. A great example of this potential for creativity is Baba Is You. This brilliant game from independent dev RV Taikari has you solving puzzles by using coding logic. So you have to do things like change what properties a wall might have based on how you arrange the controller words. This is an extremely interesting take on the puzzle genre, though it's definitely on the more difficult side, so I would recommend something more like Cocoon or even the Legend of Zelda games, again, as they incorporate puzzles into their core of what makes them unique. A classic puzzle game and core piece of literature for this course is going to be Portal. This is also another really great place to start, and I would highly recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in puzzle games. And knowing about Portal is just one of those things you need to know as a gamer. It's kind of like if an author had never even read Moby Dick or Shakespeare. It's foundational. It's also just a really great place to start, so if you're kind of stuck, I would definitely recommend checking out Portal. It's also pretty cheap on Steam. The fourth genre, and the last for today's class, is going to be role-playing games, or as they're more commonly referred to, RPGs. These are games that take after Dungeons & Dragons, and if you haven't heard of that, there are basically games, usually, though not always, fantasy-based, which have you take the role of a character in whatever world and play the game, making decisions and choices which, in a good RPG, will affect the world and the outcome of the story. Now, the term role-playing game is actually kind of contested in gaming circles because it could be argued all games have you take the role of a character and play out that role. But for this class, and for a basic understanding, it's useful to define based off of whether or not you're able to make choices, and if those choices actually have any effect on the world. And that is the real draw of these games for people who love them. Oftentimes these are longer games, and they'll usually offer multiple endings depending on which choices you've made. These are usually heavily story-based, and many take away real-time action combat and replace it instead with turn-based combat. This is where every character takes a turn landing an attack, and the chances of an attack landing are affected by the stats of the character and any number of modifiers you can add to your character. This is a holdover from the tabletop origins of the genre, and many people prefer this form of combat to the more twitchy or fast-paced real-time combat in first-person or third-person RPG games. If you're very analytical and like to really think through and plan out your moves, and if you maybe enjoy strategy-based board games, then turn-based RPGs are going to be right up your alley. But now some recommendations. And this is a hard one because a lot of RPGs are geared at more advanced players, and a lot of them don't do a really great job with tutorials. Though I think one of the genre's most revered games might be a fairly good place to start, and that is Skyrim. Skyrim gives you a lot of leeway with what you're able to do, and you can really make it as difficult or as easy as you want. There aren't too many numbers to keep track of, and the controls are pretty straightforward. So this and other Bethesda RPGs like Fallout might be a good place to start. This can also be a good place to start if you're not super comfortable with how controls in games work, because even in RPGs that use real-time combat, there's a lot more time to breathe and learn the controls outside of battle. Though keep in mind, many RPGs really are geared towards more hardcore or more advanced players. So unless you're looking for a real challenge, I would avoid this particular genre when you're looking for a good starter game. But that's just 4 of the many, many possible genres out there. And there's no way I could possibly cover them all without dedicating an entire course to that. So I hope I was able to give you a good place to start, and if you're interested in what else there is, I would highly recommend going and giving Twitch a shot, because that really is a great way to not only find a bit of community, as parasocial as it might be, but also figure out what kind of games interest you. But I hope you got something out of this class, and please let me know down in the comments if you found this at all helpful, and maybe we can convince the dean to allow us to continue Gaming 101. But that's it for today. I know this was very much on the longer side, so I really appreciate you sticking around this far. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and as always, happy gaming.